Hey everyone, and welcome. I am absolutely thrilled you're here for today's explainer. Today, we're taking something we've all seen in pop culture, all over the internet and in movies, and we're unpacking it using some really fascinating hard science. We're going to connect physics, psychology, and sociology to decode one of the internet's absolute favorite tropes. Yep, we're talking about the iconic tinfoil hat. We'll look at exactly where the idea comes from, the actual physics of metal shielding, and what's really going on inside the minds and the communities of those who find comfort in conspiratorial thinking.
So, the fundamental question we really have to ask is, why do we associate conspiracies with tinfoil hats in the first place? Okay, let's dive into this. It actually started as a literal attempt at creating a physical shield to block out external signals or, mind control. But over time, as you'll see, it's evolved into a remarkably accurate metaphor for a psychological and cultural shield against outside information and evidence. But to really understand the metaphor, we have to start with the physical reality.
Which brings us to Section 1, the physical shield, the science of Faraday cages. To understand the science here, let's look at the history of the cage, because essentially, a tinfoil hat is just a makeshift attempt to build what physicists call a Faraday cage. And looking at this timeline, the concept actually predates the tinfoil hat joke by centuries. Way back in 1754, a scientist named Jean-Antoine Nollet published an early account of this cage effect. Just a year later, in 1755, Benjamin Franklin observed this exact same effect by lowering an uncharged cork ball into an electrically charged metal can. But the real game changer, the one that actually gave the phenomenon its name, happened in 1836. Michael Faraday literally built a room entirely coated in metal foil. He used an electrostatic generator to blast the outside of the room with high-voltage discharges, and using an electroscope, he proved that the excess electrical charge resides only on the exterior of a conductor. It leaves the inside of the room completely unaffected.
So, what exactly is a Faraday cage? Simply put, it's an enclosure formed by conductive material, or a mesh of that material, that blocks electromagnetic fields. It works because when an external electrical field hits the cage, the charges within the metal distribute in a way that creates an opposing electric field. This perfectly cancels out the external field's effect inside the cage. It's brilliant. Now, while it effectively blocks electromagnetic radiation and radio frequencies, it is important to note it cannot block stable or slowly varying magnetic fields. So if you brought a compass inside a Faraday cage, it would still point north, reacting to the Earth's natural magnetic field.
And this brilliantly illustrates how a concept that gets used as a punchline in conspiracy culture is actually a foundational piece of technology for modern life. I mean, we rely on everyday Faraday cages constantly. Your microwave oven uses a partial Faraday shield and a wire mesh on the window to keep the microwave radiation safely inside. Airplanes and automobiles act as Faraday cages too, conducting the electrical current of a lightning strike completely around the passenger compartment so you stay safe. And hospitals use them for MRI scan rooms, completely enclosing the space in a grounded metal mesh to prevent any external radio frequency signals from interfering with and ruining those delicate medical images.
Moving on to Section 2, the psychological shield, the mind under the hat.
Okay, so we've seen how the physical shield works to block out radiation, but let's pivot the narrative a bit. Let's look under the hat. What psychological traits act as an internal shield against outside evidence and logic? Let's explore the psychological Faraday cage, looking at the actual data. This abstract comes from a massive empirical study by researchers, including Shauna Bowes. They impartially analyzed data across 4 separate samples, totaling nearly 2,000 community and student participants. The scientific community has heavily studied the personological and psychopathological correlates of conspiracy beliefs. They wanted to strip away the assumptions and look purely at the data. What specific personality traits make a non-clinical person prone to conspiratorial ideation?
So the crucial point is that the conspiratorial mind isn't just one thing. It's a very specific, complex mixture of traits. On one hand, traits that actually reduce the likelihood of conspiracy belief include general agreeableness, conscientiousness, and a healthy self-esteem. But on the flip side, we see the traits that increase susceptibility. It's often a combination of psychological distress, things like depression and anxiety, mixed with impulsivity, disinhibition, and narcissism. Narcissistic individuals in particular often have an inflated sense of self and tend to externalize blame for threatening events onto others, and that makes conspiracies incredibly appealing to them.
Another major piece of this psychological puzzle is intellectual humility, or IH. Basically, this is the propensity to be aware of your own cognitive biases and to genuinely evaluate the evidentiary basis for your beliefs. It's the ability to say, hey, maybe I'm wrong about this. The research strongly indicates that a lack of intellectual humility acts as a very thick psychological insulator. When someone lacks IH, outside facts and disconfirming evidence simply bounce off their worldview, exactly like an electromagnetic wave bouncing off the exterior of our Faraday cage.
But we really have to connect this back to human nature to understand why all of this matters. You see, conspiracy beliefs aren't just logic puzzles gone wrong. They satisfy deep emotional and existential needs. For someone dealing with intense internalizing symptoms like severe anxiety, feelings of powerlessness, or anger, a conspiracy theory provides a comforting, explanatory framework for threatening, chaotic events. It provides order in a messy world. The psychological shield isn't just blocking out facts, it's insulating the person from existential dread. Let's move to Section 3, the cultural shield, culturally evolved epistemologies.
So we understand the individual under the hat, right? But what happens when we zoom out from the individual to the macro-sociological level? What happens when these isolated minds, with their psychological shields, find each other online or out in the real world? Well, I absolutely love this quote from a recent paper by sociologists Dorico and Yasseri. They state, conspiracy theories are best understood as culturally evolved epistemologies, frameworks that can prescribe what counts as evidence, who's trustworthy, and how to handle disconfirmation. Okay, let's translate that dense academic phrasing. It basically means that conspiracies are not just individual glitches in logic, they are highly organized, shared cultural networks that tell an entire community exactly who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, and precisely who they should trust.
Let's move to and see how this builds into real-world behavior. First, they persist as incredibly robust subcultures. They don't just fade away when challenged, they adapt. Second, they integrate with broader belief systems, sometimes political, sometimes spiritual, making them deeply rooted in a person's core identity. And finally, they create completely alternative rules for what counts as evidence. If evidence contradicts the theory, the framework automatically categorizes that evidence as part of the cover-up. Together, these cultural networks form a giant, collective Faraday cage around the entire community's worldview.
Which brings us to Section 4, the future. Conspiracies in the age of AI.
This kicks off the final act of our explainer. We've covered the physics, the psychology, and the sociology. But how does this entire ecosystem of belief change as we look to the future? Let's introduce the ultimate wildcard into this equation, artificial intelligence. As detailed by sociological research, AI plays an incredibly fascinating dual role here. It's a double-edged sword. On the threat side, AI is a dangerous accelerant. It speeds up the generation and spread of conspiracy narratives, and AI itself is increasingly becoming the subject of terrifying new conspiracy theories. But look at the solution side. AI simultaneously offers researchers and sociologists novel, incredibly powerful tools for mapping these cultural networks, analyzing the spread of data, and countering misinformation at a scale that humans simply couldn't ever achieve manually.
And that leaves us with a final, provocative thought to wrap up today's explainer. As artificial intelligence completely reshapes our information ecosystem, accelerating both truth and fiction, I want you to ask yourself, how thick is your own epistemological shield? We all have cognitive biases, for sure. We all seek order when things feel chaotic. I really hope seeing the science behind the tinfoil hat encourages you to practice a little more intellectual humility, to reflect on your own biases, and leaves you hungry to keep learning about how your amazing mind processes the world around you. Thank you so much for diving into this with me.